not. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. If you're just hearing me for the first time, a few of you still connecting to audio. I think I've still got a few people coming through in the waiting room. So just to give you a bit of a heads up, this session is being recorded, so you're more than welcome to keep your cameras switched off. I'm absolutely fine with that. And we will turn it off before the questions at the end. So don't worry too much about that. Some familiar names here, so welcome. And I hope you're all doing really well. And as I said, I've got a few more still coming in. So if you give me a few more minutes, that would be wonderful. And then we'll get across and we'll get cracking with everything that we're doing today. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Grace, and I'm going to be taking you through LM3 within the hour, essentially. So we're going to do a bit of a crash course in LM3. And for those of you who have done LM1 and LM2 in the series, there's going to be a little bit of overlap. For those of you who haven't, please don't worry. I will try to give you certain context as we go throughout today. So thank you very much for all joining me on a Friday afternoon whilst it's blisteringly cold outside. I really do appreciate it. So for those of you who are here live, something rather exciting. So some of you may well know that we do on-demand courses for the CII modules, and we have one for LM3. For those of you who are here at the moment, you are very welcome to have free access for the weekend. My assistant colleague over here, Lily Crawley, if you would like to put your email to her in private, we can get you signed up on that, and then your access will end at the end of the weekend. But the best part of it is that today is Black Friday, and so there are lots of Black Friday deals and Cyber Monday deals going on. So if you feel like it's something that you would like, and you look at it over the weekend and you think that it's going to be beneficial for you, you can actually make the most of the discount still on Monday. So if you are wanting to be signed up for free over the weekend, please do email my colleague Lily in the chat function, and she's here just for the first part of today's session. So if you miss her, then just email me privately and I'll make sure that the email address gets linked up to our team. Okay, excellent. So I think most of you have finished coming through now. So I'm going to go across to the slides. As I said, to those of you who joined before I mentioned this session is being recorded, so it goes onto our YouTube channel at the weekend and also our Instagram as well. And so, as I said, if you want to hold back on questions till the end, you're more than welcome to do so. I will open up the chat just to keep an eye on it throughout. So I will see that here. And just in case anyone does need any help or wants to put anything in there, then please do. But otherwise, I will take questions when the recording stops at the end. Okay, should we get going then? So we have 5 chapters to do here. And as I said, I'm going to give them each a proportion of time. So just to give you a bit of an overview for LM3, as I said, it is the 3rd in the series. You don't necessarily had to have done the London Market Essentials and LM2 as well, but it does help because they're all written by the same author, the lovely Charlotte Waugh, and essentially they are good things in terms of reminding yourself of content. For those of you who don't know the actual makeup of the exam, we've got 75 multiple choice questions here, so 1 answer out of 4. And for this particular exam, you're allowed 2 hours. So that's maybe a little bit more than you had in LM1 or any of some of the other modules that you might have done. The reason that I've just drawn your attention to this, which is at the beginning of the book, the summary of the learning outcomes is quite key because the numbers on the right-hand side are the general guidance of how many questions in the examination relate to that particular topic. Now, for those of you who are seasoned CIIers, you will know that sometimes the learning outcomes don't necessarily marry up with the chapters, but in this book, thank goodness to the author, they do. So we've got chapter 1, learning outcome 1, chapter 2, learning outcome 2, and so on. So in terms of what we're going to be doing today, I will try my best to actually kind of guide it around how many questions. So you can see that chapter 5 has a lot of questions there, 24 involved in that. Chapter 1 is a pretty long chapter, but we do have to do that because that's got the foundation of everything that you really need to know in it. So even though it's only got 5 questions really attached to it, you still really do need to know all about that particular chapter. So we will spend a little bit of time on that as well. Okay, so let's get going. As I said, a little bit intensive, make as many notes as you wish to. Don't worry too much about kind of jotting everything down on the slides because these will all be within the course. If you do have access to it over the weekend, you can absolutely go and see some of these slides within the actual course itself. So please don't worry about that. So chapter 1, we're going to go straight in, and this is all about the framework of business. So that's what this particular chapter is called. It starts by looking at global and domestic markets. So just to kind of draw you into that particular definition, global, we're thinking about where you perhaps base yourself in one particular country. However, your brand, your service carries around the world. And so you are able to do business on a very global scale. And so Lloyds would refer to itself as being a global market because it has access to all of these different areas. A domestic market, on the other hand, is simply where one business is just serving its own territory. So for us, that would be the UK, for those of you who are within the UK. In terms of how we go about kind of getting the sources of business and geographically where they come from, just to remind you of some of the statistics within the book. So you might remember from, again, previous books, the IUA, this is the International Underwriting Association. You'll be mindful of the fact that they are looking out for the company market, so the company insurance and reinsurance market. Now you can see here that the majority of the premiums that are written for this particular area of market are within the UK and Ireland. And that's because a lot of these companies, so the likes of Aviva, Direct Line, RSA, they tend to write business in the domestic market. They tend to write, although this has a slightly different meaning, they tend to write domestic risks. And that is essentially your personal lines and your, the things like household insurance, car insurance, etc. So you'll see the split is very much, goes slightly downwards in terms of percentages as you get further around the world. If I show you a very similar breakdown, but for Lloyds this time, so remember, Lloyds, we have the Society of Lloyds. It's not an insurer in its own right, it's a marketplace. And so again, if you've done the previous LM books, you will know that. And this book will very much be focused on the Lloyds way of doing things. So hopefully the majority of you on this call are quite familiar with how Lloyds operates now, but we will give you a little bit of a reminder today. And you'll start to see that because of the global reach of the Lloyds market, generally in terms of locations and the sources of business coming and the premium that's coming in, you'll see that over half is related and attributable to the USA and Canada. And so UK is actually kind of a little bit further down, and then we've got the rest of Europe and then the rest of the world as well. So you'll start to see some of the kind of the distribution as well as we'll go through. And certainly in chapter 5, it looks again at how that all works and how is that set up. Let's remind, for those of you who haven't perhaps done the previous LM books, and also for those of you who have and just want a bit of a reminder, in terms of permissions, remember we've got this concept where we need to be licensed. And so if we're writing business in different areas of the world, we absolutely need permission from the local government. So remember, Lloyds does this centrally. That's one of the benefits of being a managing agent, of being a syndicate, because you've got this access to certain markets because Lloyds has already negotiated those centrally for you. Whereas companies have to individually go to particular governments, so the Kenyan government, the Malaysian government, whoever it might be, and actually specifically ask and jump through a number of hoops to try and get permission to write there. So that's the distinction. Equally, there are certain other ways to get around licensing. So you might remember, for example, that in the US, we are only actually permitted to write business in 3 states, areas, I should say. So Kentucky, Illinois, and the US Virgin Islands. And then the rest of it, primarily, we will do on an indirect basis or a reinsurance basis. So we're just a little bit of an arm's length away from what that is. So for example, something could get placed locally with AIG in California and then perhaps reinsured back into the London market. So just to remind you of some of these permissions and where they stem from. Moving on and just looking a little bit at Lloyds generally, there's a whole section in here. And the reason I'm pointing this out, by the way, guys, I've specifically pulled out kind of the real key points. Obviously, the name of the webinar is what you need to know. There are other aspects that we could go into lots of detail with, but obviously we've only got the hour. So in terms of Lloyd's work streams, I've put this in because this is a relatively new area of the book because it talks about the impact of COVID-19. And it talks a little bit about how the fact that Lloyd's had to review its priorities. Lloyd's have therefore come up with these 6 things. And in my mind, I've just got this vision of there being, questions in the exam about these. So that's why I wanted to pay close attention to them. So just to give you a very brief overview, the first one, delegated contract manager and delegated compliance manager. This is all to do with the ongoing oversight of delegated authorities. We'll talk a little bit about those a bit more in chapter 5, but ultimately, these delegated kind of areas really do need oversight. We've got cover holders all over the world that Lloyds is obviously very nervous, having the pen, being able to write business on behalf of Lloyds syndicates and things like that. We need to be able to keep an eye on those. Next generation PPL, the beloved Placing Platform Limited. I call it that ironically because there was some resistance towards the beginning of when this was implemented, but then we had COVID-19, and thank goodness we had something like this in place to avoid the need to actually go to underwriters face to face. So we're going through a next level of PPL to make it a little bit more streamlined, a little bit easier to use. The same thing is happening on the claim side. I've got a bit of an affinity for the ECF system. I'm ex-claims, so electronic claims file was the PPL version for claims, and that came into place probably about 15 years ago now, but it's going through a little bit of a rehash. They talk a little bit here about the replacement of the current system, and so maybe getting systems to talk to each other a little bit more. That ties in equally to data and technology, but much more about the gathering of information and how we get accurate data, streamlining processes. Same thing goes for the middle and back office. How do we make sure that they're focused and centralized, and how do you make sure that their processes are simplified as possible? And then finally, you'll remember that the London market is very much a subscription market, and as such we have leads and we have follows. Now at the moment, both on the placing side and on the claim side, leads and follows have to talk to each other quite a lot. They have to liaise with their broker, they have to collaborate, and there is an ongoing kind of view that perhaps the following market might need to get less involved. Maybe they can just rely on the expertise of the lead, and therefore the following market won't necessarily have to keep going back to the lead and asking for further things. And so this is all about kind of modernizing this process of the subscription market. So there are 6 work streams. A couple of other things just to mention towards the end of chapter 1, or the middle part of chapter 1, I should say. We're all back to regulators. Now, actually, in terms of what you perhaps have learned in LM1 and LM2, there isn't as much about regulation in here. It's slightly different because it's much more Lloyds focused. But they talk a little bit about the PRA, essentially being the authorizer of insurance companies. And so the Society of Lloyds will work with them, managing agents will work with them. And remember, the FCA looks at the conduct areas. So they will also work with the Society of Lloyds and managing agents, but also Lloyds brokers and member agents. If any of you remember, the member agent is who introduces the name to the syndicate. You might have learnt that all the way back in LM1. So remember, these are our dual regulators. On a global basis, on a worldwide basis, a new one has popped into this book that you might not have come across before, and that is the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, or IAIS for short. Now, they have very much of a coordination role. So they have over 100 countries that subscribe, if you like, and are members of this particular association. And so they all talk to each other, and so to uphold insurance standards across the world. So just as an example, for the purposes of the UK, the PRA, the Prudential Regulation Authority, is a member of IAIS, and Lloyds is what we call an observer. So it's a slightly different kind of interaction, but they are an IAIS observer. That's the main things for the purposes of the multiple choice that perhaps you should commit to memory. Another thing that you should maybe look to commit to memory, and I appreciate it's not the most exciting subject, it can be very, very dry, but it's just a bit of a recap on some of these handbooks and source books, if any of you remember some of these. ICOBs and PRIN, as you can see in that first column there, are associated with the Financial Conduct Authority. So if you remember, let me just give you a memory boost. ICOBs is the Insurance Conduct of Business Sourcebook. It has 8 primarily chapters that we are primarily focused on. And essentially, they look at lots of different things: distance marketing, claims, cancellations, treatment of customers, all of those areas. PRIN is the Principles for Business. So if you do sign up for the weekend course, you'll be able to get a printable copy of PRIN. There are 11 principles altogether, things like integrity, again, treatment of customers, conflicts of interest. And so you'll get a poster that you can just put on your desk, and then by osmosis, that will hopefully go into your brain before the exam. In terms of the PRA, they are our remaining kind of source books and the areas that they focus on. So we have fitness and proprietary. So we're looking at, are you fit and proper to do the job that you're doing? And that does tie in ever so slightly with senior insurance management functions. So for those of you who have done the books recently or looked at other modules, we have SMCR, and that stands for Senior Managers Certification Regime. Again, on the on-demand course, there's a little cartoon that talks you through that and explains the 3 different levels of how that particular aspect works. It's relatively new, so I do think I can almost guarantee there'll be 1 or 2 questions on it. As I said, it's a new area, so it wants to be examined as such. And then finally, the Lloyds special provisions come under the remit of the PRA as well. So you want to kind of compartmentalize in your mind which handbooks and source books go to which regulator. Moving on slightly to corporate governance. Now, this has been updated recently too. So the UK Corporate Governance Code is something that is looking to companies to make sure that they're setting standards at the top, and then this is cascading down throughout the company. And so there are 5 key ones that I should recommend that you learn as a list. For those of you, I mean, you're used to, I'm assuming this is probably your 3rd book. And so you know how these questions are worded now. There can be negative questions that says, which one of these is not part of the UK Corporate Governance Code. And so it is always really beneficial to learn these lists of 3s, 4s, 5s, just so that you've got it into your head and you can spot them in the lineup. So just to give you a brief overview, we've got the UK Corporate Governance Code here. The first part of it focuses on the actual board's leadership and what is the purpose, what is the mission statement of the company. Then we have the division of responsibilities. So how do we make sure that within the board, no one individual is taking control and dominating all the decisions, making sure that they're supported by the company secretary, making sure that they're giving out clear information